how has been your journey? Like how did you from a small enterprise to you made it such a multi-billion, multi-country, and what kind of learning, what kind of processes you had? How did you make it so big at from early stage?
Okay. Basically, when I inherited the company had been into huge losses. And this was a loss that had happened very similar to what COVID had happened, but this was a bilateral problem between Russia and India. Russia was the largest buyer of all commodities from India at that point of time. And we had a very good relationship with Russia. But when Indira Gandhi was in government, they had a problem of what should be imported and what should be exported out of India. And the bilateral agreement broke down. And because of that, the prices of cashews, we were the largest suppliers of cashews in the world. And by that, Russia was the largest buyer. The contracted products that was already contracted by the Russians, they refused to take. And because of that, the prices internationally just crashed. There was no limit to how much it crashed. It crashed by about 60%. And what was otherwise going to be the most profitable business of my father's career, who was otherwise an extremely successful person, turned out to be the biggest loss, into which, from having a 16 crore fixed deposit in Indian Overseas Bank in 1982, which is a large amount of money, which
Right.
was possibly one of the highest fixed deposit anybody had in South India at that point of time, it went into a minus of 5.5 crores in Indian Overseas Bank itself, and a total liability of 40 crores of rupees happened. And that actually changed the whole dynamics of this problem. Added to it, there was a heart attack that my father had, and because of that, all these problems started accumulating. I was at that point of time studying my degree course in a college in Koilan called Fatima College. So the banker said that unless I guarantee that, because I was the son that was remaining in India, and unless I guarantee the liability, the banks will not even think about refinancing. They will go into a litigation with us. And in a car, three people came, including somebody from the bank and my office. And from my classroom, I was asked to come out and sign papers. On top of an ambassador car, I was asked to sign papers. I really did not know the complexities of that, and I didn't think that my father expected it to be creating such a major problem. But I signed the papers, they went back, and they did not give a limit back, and they just filed for a bankruptcy of the company. And that happened to become the largest litigation that Indian Overseas Bank had taken in the whole country at that point of time. So there was a lot of representation to the Commerce Ministry, to Finance Ministry, to say that this loss had come beyond the control of the exporter, which the Commerce Ministry agreed. But all these representations, they have agreed on paper that it was not because the businessman made a loss, but nobody was willing to reconsider refinancing, restructure the liabilities and everything. Along with us, we were the biggest. There are about 80 other exporters that went bankrupt, and none of them really are alive today. So it was a very major challenge for me, with my father actually being a little disabled because of the heart attack, for me to come into the business and try to take control of the business with such a large operation. There were, at that point of time, 150,000 workers for us, with exports at that point of time happening to about 22 countries. You had to have the operation going. The government was, the sales tax liabilities had come, so they were putting pressure. All the creditors were putting pressure. All of it had come at a point of time when I did not know. I used to go to work on all holidays of mine because I enjoyed it from the age of 14. From my 10th standard holidays itself, I used to go to the factory, go to work and everything. But I had not gone into marketing. I had not gone into procurement so much. I knew production, but I did not know. So the magnitude of problem that came in was something that I had not been used to, or I think that nobody in the company was used to that kind of a magnitude of problem. The only thing that my father was telling me is, and it's the most interesting part is even during this whole situation, he was at that point of time possibly one of the richest people in India. But even when he went into a loss, his basic lifestyle did not change. He was a very simple man. He would get up at the morning at 5 o'clock. He would have his yoga. He would go and do his tennis. He would come back. He would always wear a white cotton shirt and a dhoti. Uh, but because he had a simple life, I couldn't recognize that there was a problem, and he lived the same problem. So one day when the problem really rose, I went up to and asked him that, okay, how is it possible that you can actually do the same thing? I mean, you know that the problems are very high. How are we going to deal with it? He said that the process by which I came up so big, I was a very poor child. My father was a farmer who did not have so much of money. I have 6 people in my family. I did never knew how I could marry all my 3 sisters, what my younger brothers would do, and everything. All this happened, and I worked very hard. Things happened. I became very large. Today, things are against me. I become my businesses are small. But keep this work going on. You will see that the tide changes, situation change, and things will start happening. I couldn't believe it at that point of time, because from an area where the chairmans of banks would come to the house, invite us to dinners and everything. It so happened for us to get a meeting with them was difficult, because everybody was looking for the fixed deposit, everybody was looking for the export transactions that were happening, and all those things. But when things became difficult, nobody wanted to touch us. So I started only implementing one thing of doing my work, continue to do my work, and keep on giving the liabilities according to what I could. So slowly, a person who I owed 1 crore of rupees. If I made a 10,000 rupee profit, I will go and give him a check. I used to be extremely angry because that check would not even be sufficient for the interest of the 1 crore that they actually had, and it would have now not be any relationship with the liability. So whenever they were angry, I said, okay, you have 2 options: either to close me down or accept whatever I can give. As I grow, I will start giving you more. I continued that mode for 2 years, and none of the liabilities I had even paid even a small portion of the interest. And the interest was much more higher than the amounts that were being given, because at that point of time, the interest rates were like 24%, 26%, and it was very high. It is not the interest rate rates today. So their loans were also at a high rate. But people started forgetting that we had liabilities, and they started extending credit. Suppliers started extending credit, and to the extent that somebody came up to me and said, look here, I'll give you any amount of money. I said, you know that we already owe a lot of money to you. I said, don't worry, I know this is like a Reserve Bank of India. Any amount of money, I will get it at some point of time. That made the difference. And that actually created a lot of enthusiasm within the group. We made the belief that it could actually go on. And once that happened, one of the things that I did is I actually divided the businesses into two. I knew that the interest alone that I had to pay every year was close to about 2.5 crores of rupees. So unless you have a large enough business where the profits were much more higher than that interest rate, you cannot think about paying the money. But still, I had a problem when there was huge liabilities in one operation. How do I expand? How do I make a feeling of attracting good managers to come and work with you? One, at that point of time, there were not enough professionals around. Even today, the kind of professionals that we can get is far lesser. But at that point of time, there were very few professionals around, and you needed the professionals to actually implement larger projects. So I started dividing the loss-making companies into one, and all my expansion projects, I had different verticals by which they never had any direct relationship with the loss-making companies. Because the more that I had to use to enthusiast and make new projects actually go forward was very different from a mode that where you are actually paying interest, where you are paying liabilities, and how you need to treat a difficult company. So those kind of small changes that actually happened. So the new businesses started doing very well. That could actually support the older business. And it took me close to about 22 years to pay back the full liability. But that 22 years of work is so satisfying as far as I am concerned, because nobody in this industry ever expected me to come out of it. But also, I knew that no problem is not capable to be handled. If you keep a very balanced mind, lot of hard work, and keep continuing to your destination, that makes the difference. And with that, you keep continuing and you can keep on growing. Meanwhile, one more major problem happened, that in while this process was just going on, my brother, who was extremely successful, who was the chairman of Britannia, he died, and that liability also came to me. You should understand the problems are when a very successful person actually creates liability or has problems. That problems are far bigger than what you can expect. So in 84, when we had a 40 crore liability, I was laid in 1997 a liability of close to 450 crores of rupees from a different source, and I was the only man standing. And my father, by that time, was already laid in the bed. He couldn't walk around. He had a stroke and everything. So, as a family person, to be able to go around, have a reputation to be maintained, I had to take up that liability even before the first liability was over. But by the time, most of the people had actually forgotten there was a liability, because I was paying the interest, I was satisfying the basic needs. But that liability was another challenge that I actually faced. But I knew from the earlier experience that the only thing that you can keep on doing is to get into a direction. You needed to grow the company even further, because the liabilities that you have to pay should look relatively small. Only then you can actually pay back liability. Because when you have a liability of 40 crores of rupees and you have a turnover, for example, of 3.5 crores of rupees, whatever cost cutting you do, you will never be able to pay even the interest and everything. But when you have a liability of 40 crores, if you have a 400 or 500 crore business, you have a possibility of paying part of the interest and part of the capital. And then you can start restructuring. And any place, if you start offering cash to them at that point of time, it can actually make a difference. And that is the change. And that is that second liability of my brother. I could finish it only in 2017. But all the time, you should understand when there is a major problem, there is no quick fix for it. It has to be understood, processed, faced, and hard work over and over and over again for us to reach the destination.